All right, everybody, we are back again for another Coach's Compass episode. Again, don't know what episode we're on. We're just continuing to roll through and bring on guests each and every week, right? We're super excited about this next guest, but always hit that subscribe button, like, comment, right? It's your boy, Coach Coop, Coach Jay, reporting live all the way from Europe. And again, like I said, got a special guest with us today. We got our guy, Bryan Jones, former professional hockey player, owner of Efficient Strength Training LLC, Bluffton High School strength and conditioning coach, personal training provider out of Data Spring Island, offering athletes the competitive advantage through scientific methods. Also runs his own app called Xelerate Performance, helping coaches develop and solve a big problem in the coaching industry, especially when it comes to coaching athletes. And we're going to dive super deep into that whole app thing and what he's been seeing throughout this whole industry, especially coming from being a pro hockey player to going on to this side of stuff. But welcome, Bryan. Thank you for being here with us.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. So good stuff.
Awesome, man. So first, before we even get into, these super scientific questions and everything that you're doing, bro, how are you doing, man? Like that's a huge thing we want to jump into because, June, mental health month for men, right? So how are you doing, man?
It's doing well. I mean, either way, what we do as coaches and whatever, it's a privilege to be able to work with athletes and to be able to make them better every single day, and they get paid to do so. I mean, that's one thing that we always kind of strive to work towards, even when we start getting into the industry. I mean, getting into the industry is one of the hardest things, breaking in, especially in the States, because you have to do, at least at the college sector, you have to do months, if not years, of interning for free and stuff like that to even break into it. And even so, you're going to have a tough time making a living. You're eating ramen noodles and that kind of stuff. But I'm really happy and excited, especially since I made a decision to go off my own and start my own business, to be able to not only make a decent living, but also help athletes in the process. So that's one of the best parts of life, I'd say.
So former athlete, professional at that level, how did you convert over to this side, and what was that process? Like you said, it's a tough one, especially in the States, a hard industry to break into. How did you get into it?
So my first strength and conditioning coach was when I was 12. He was the strength and conditioning coach for the Utica Comets in the American Hockey League. So he kind of knew what he was doing. And so I kind of grew up with a strength and conditioning coach, and it was more in the powerlifting side of things. But I just really enjoyed being in the weight room and saw how much it would help me improve my performance on the ice. And so not only on the ice, but also for combines and that kind of stuff, I always felt prepared. And so that kind of dictated where I was going to go for my major. So that's when I decided to go after I retired, I decided to go to Indiana University of Pennsylvania to get my bachelor's degree in exercise science. And during that time, when I was a junior, this was before internships started or anything like that, I reached out to my old strength coach being like, hey, can I spend the summer with you up in Syracuse and just work for free and learn from you? And so he said yes. And so I spent that whole summer interning with him up in Syracuse. And that really helped me in the industry because not a lot of people come into it with a lot of experience, and they know all the book knowledge, right? So they could take the CS, they could have all that book knowledge, but if you can't apply it, well, then it doesn't mean much. And so what's really important is having the exercise inventory, being able to progress and regress exercises to be able to accommodate every single athlete or whomever you're working with. And that's what you get with hands-on experience. And so that really helped me out, kind of get a jump start ahead of everybody else who was an exercise science major. And so right after that, I was able to kind of hit the ground rolling and start strength and conditioning at Carnegie Mellon University, which is a Division III school, and so on, and also working as a site director for a company called Explosive Performance, and actually building my own business underneath a brand and actually kind of learning the business side of things as well.
Wow. But starting strength training at 12. Now, would you say that's pretty common for a lot of athletes, or would you recommend that to athletes, like starting at 12? Like, because, some people have say it's too early, it's too, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So back in those days, it was completely abnormal. That it was not a normal thing. Nowadays, you see it a lot more, actually, from the understanding that even with my high school athletes, it's not about the weight that you put up. It's all about basically developing your central nervous system and being able to recruit more muscle fibers and so on, and creating more movement mass. And so even at that age, like if you're doing single leg body weight type exercise, you're developing the central nervous system, you're developing movement mass, you're teaching your brain to recruit muscle fibers to do certain movements. And so therefore, when you basically get to the age where you start achieving adaptation, secreting more testosterone or whatever, you have those movement maps that are recruiting more muscle fibers and so on with each and every movement. And so therefore, they'll achieve more adaptation when that time comes. And so it's very important, even at young ages, to even incorporate single leg body weight type movement and so on, because it just helps develop the central nervous system. And either way, when I move my hand out here, my muscles didn't tell me to do that. My brain did. And so what we're doing is incorporating those movement maps and so on to be able to progress when the time comes.
How do you learn that, know that, and get to that point to where you like, all right, a 12-year-old, like it should be like movement maps, and like, it doesn't matter about the weight on the bar and all that stuff too, where you're progressing them until they, they hit their, puberty and all that stuff. Like where does that like knowledge come from? Because obviously you talked about books before, but sometimes you gotta,
Yeah. So with that philosophy, I kind of got that. So when I was working at Carnegie Mellon University, I worked under Alan DeGeneres, who before that, he was an assistant strength and conditioning coach for the Cleveland Browns. He had a lot of books and so on. I learned a lot from him. But he interned under Charlie Francis, who's basically the god of speed training. And he really got me onto a lot of Charlie Francis methodology and a lot of his books and so on. And all that has to deal with is just generating movement maps and all that kind of stuff and developing the central nervous system. And not only that, but just incorporating a lot of stuff that I not only learned from my master's degree in exercise science, but also when I was in the PhD program in exercise physiology at Kent State in neurobiology and that kind of stuff, and really kind of incorporating that kind of book science into what actually my philosophy as a strength coach is and how I progress athletes.
Could you take us through like the movement maps? Right, because that can be confusing to people. Like, what does movement map mean?
Yeah. So basically, what it means is like, so let's say if you take just a regular person, okay, tell them to go out in a lateral lunge. What's it going to look like? It's going to look like absolute trash, absolute trash, because they've never done it. They've never done it before. They never practiced it. Okay, and so through that. Okay, through regression, okay, you can't maybe do a lateral lunge, but what about a Cossack lunge? What if we do something a little bit more from a static perspective? And that's how you kind of teach a movement map, is that you start doing it slower from a static position and progress it to actual movement, so the brain actually starts learning it. And it's the same thing with riding a bike. Like you hop on a bike for the first time, you're not going to know how to do it. But at the same time, through practice, you're going to start learning it and so on. And so all it is from a movement map perspective is that, like, even if somebody did like a squat for the first time, it may not look perfect or whatever, but through practice, what's going to happen is your brain is going to start learning what muscles to recruit for that movement. And when it starts doing that, then it's going to start increasing how much muscle fibers it recruits with that movement. And then when you start applying load or doing progression or overload, such as manipulating tempo or whatever, you're going to achieve more adaptation. And so that's the whole premise behind it.
Man, that's so. When I hear you speak about it all, right, like you've got a lot of knowledge behind it, and the scientific terminology for all this stuff. And obviously you had to have a lot of degrees, right? A lot of studying you've done. Now, how do you get that to translate over to a high school or middle school athlete, that those big words you just used, they have no clue what you're talking about, coach? You know what I mean? Like, what are some of the cues you're using for like a youth athlete or even a professional athlete that comes in and doesn't know the big words that you're using?
Yeah, no, I mean, it all starts with single leg exercise by a mile. I mean, because with single leg exercise, one is they basically, like, that's how I start athletes off. I don't start off with adding on load or doing back squats or anything like that. I want to make sure that they could do stuff from a single leg perspective. If they could do stuff from a single leg perspective, from a slow, controlled manner, for instance, just like a single leg step down from a bench or whatever, being able to tap the heel and come back up nice, slow, and controlled, that's going to tell me. I don't have to sit there and explain them all that science mumbo jumbo. But for me, if they could do that movement nice, slow, and controlled, then I know that when I apply load to them, then they're going to start achieving adaptation a lot quicker. Because not only, one, are they more efficient from a neuromuscular perspective, but additionally, they also are correcting strength deviations between both limbs and so on. And so it makes sure that, one, is that they don't have, because a lot of times what you see is there's always one side is a little bit stronger than the other and so on. So when you focus from basically a single leg or single limb or single arm exercise and then progress from there, then that's basically making everything easier for you as a coach, because then you don't have to go through this whole thing, try the squat. Okay, well, you didn't do so well, so let's find some other stuff to work on. But it's all about creating a strong foundation. And through that, I do a lot of that with single leg exercise or single limb exercise or whatsoever.
What population do you work with, if just for context,
It'll
mainly?
be anywhere between 6 and 21 mostly. They could be like really, really young or whatever. But a lot of the young one, that's has to do a lot with speed training and that kind of stuff, because speed training is definitely a hot topic and something that not all strength coaches are all that proficient in. And so for me, I mean, I've been doing speed training for a long time. And for me, it's very, very important, especially for my philosophy from developing the central nervous system. That's all that speed training does, and so on. And so that's who we work with most.
What, like, with regards to your philosophy, and like I think all coaches have to deal with the same problem where it's like, from you're in high school and you only get these athletes for 4 years. You're in college, you only get these athletes for 4 years. Sometimes in the private sector, you may work with these kids from 6 until they're professional athletes. What is your philosophy, or not more so philosophy, but what is your breakdown with regards to progression or regression? Where it's just like, I'll have this athlete from 10, and I probably won't have him anymore at this point. It's just like, and where I need to get him to within this allotted time that I have.
Yeah. Well, I mean, either way, everything that we do is mostly specific to the individual. We never really want to be too overly general, because there's athletes that are very further along in the continuum than other ones, right? Because like with what we do, there's a huge continuum. There's a continuum of complete regression, which is physical therapy. And then there's complete progression, which is professional athletes, and finding where each and every athlete is within that continuum. That's how you program for each and every one, even in large groups, because like you could actually kind of do it very easily as long as you tell a story with everything and so on. And so again, like when they start off with me, like we do streamline dynamic warm up and that kind of stuff. Always work on skip work. Always kind of incorporate some type of plyometric, at least when it's periodized, or at least when it's kind of like not every single day. But then progressing from that single leg exercise, being able to do that nice and efficiently, and then progressing from there and so on. Because like if you're very, very specific, like as in, let's say, okay, well, it's going to be this, and that. I just haven't seen that to be work very well with youth athletes. It's more as in just developing them complete from a movement perspective. Because a lot of these athletes that we're working with, especially like when they get to a higher level at a young age, like 12, 14 or whatever, they're specializing in sports very early. So they're going to be like, okay, well, I'm very good at football, so that's all I'm going to do is football. Or I'm really good at soccer, that's all I'm going to do is soccer. I mean, I did the same thing in hockey. I was really good at hockey. I had to quit soccer and all this other kind of stuff. And so at that young age, when they quit those sports, then they basically lose the opportunity to lose the movements and movement patterns that they learned from those other sports. Even though they may not be specific to the sport that they're specializing in, it's very important as from a development perspective for kids to be able to learn those movements and so on. And so through the weight room, by incorporating a lot of different movement patterns and a lot of different planes of motion and so on, to kind of recover for that, I think is very important. So we do focus a lot on that as well.
What are you using to kind of determine, if an athlete is ready to progress? Because you say you start them off with a lot of single leg movements and you're seeing that one leg is more dominant than the other. How are you, building it up to where they're equal or balanced out now, and then progressing them along the way?
Yeah, so it's basically just doing variations of the single leg stuff, whether it be a single leg step down, whether it be a lunge, a lateral lunge, whether it be a single leg RDL, that kind of stuff. Because there's a bunch of different ways you can kind of do that, but it's more based off of just how they're moving. Like if they're like moving not with a positive shin angle, if they're doing a lateral lunge and their knees coming way out, well, they're going to need a lot more work on that. But at the same time, once they start really being able to move efficiently and being able not necessarily have to think about it so much when they go through the motions, and you could tell. It's very, very easy to tell, especially when you've been working with these guys for a while. If their central nervous system's overloaded. There's a lot of different ways to tell that. And they start messing stuff up and that kind of stuff. And that tells you, okay, let's keep things simple. But if they're kind of really moving along and chugging along with it and doing it very, very easily, well, it's very easy to tell, okay, let's start progressing you. Let's start adding load. Let's start doing different movements.
Are there any metrics that you guys use to track where they're at on a day-to-day basis, like just objectively?
Yeah, I mean, just the normal stuff. Like, I mean, either way, like, I've been ahead of the strength program for at least a year now. So just the normal type of measures that you'd see in any type of strength and conditioning atmosphere, whether it be stuff on a vertical jump mat, that kind of stuff, or just doing more like 3 rep maxes, not necessarily 1 rep maxes. Because again, with at least youth, I'm not necessarily so focused with how much weight they put up. I'm focused on how they move. Because a lot of it is like, especially when I was a college strength coach, I mean, you'd see so much. And you always have to start off from ground one with athletes. And we, like, as college strength coaches, we always hated that. And not only that, but then they'd come in as bench press heroes, like they're very anteriorly dominated. Their shoulders are very anteriorly rotated and that kind of stuff. So we would be focusing so much on correcting all the stuff that they did in high school for the first 6 months rather than actually progressing them. And so for me, I want to be that person that helps out the college strength coaches, incorporating stuff like 3 upper body pulls for every 1 push, making sure posture is nice and neat, making sure that their movements are nice and specific, make sure in cleans they can do bar drills efficiently. So when they do get to that level at college where where it's actually more important, where they're actually pushing the load, they can do it more efficiently and don't have to spend that first 6 months actually being like, okay, we have to focus on the basics first.
What are the major gaps you're seeing in strength and conditioning? Not for the athlete side, but for coaching.
A lot of it is, especially in the high school side, is that it's ran by coaches. It's ran by football coaches. It's ran by basketball coaches. At least down here in the Low Country, Bluffton High School is actually the first high school in this area to actually have a strength and conditioning coach that's outside of their program. And that's something that I want to change, at least around here. Because I know, like, if you go in more populated areas like New York City, DC, it's a lot more common that you see like a strength and conditioning coach for their high schools. But down here, it's non-existent, hasn't been around, and so on. So a lot of it's just been programs that have been looked up on Google by a football coach or whatever, and that's what they kind of roll with, and so on. And what you see with that is you just see a lot of injuries because I'm a big believer in that load is key, volume is killer. I mean, it's very important to find the specific load that you want to work at, but if you do it at too high volumes, that always leads to injury. And with a coach's program, they're not going to understand how to manipulate volumes or that, or to be able to tell, hey, man, like maybe we got to push it back a little bit. So that's definitely one of them. From another perspective is that, at least in the commercial fitness space, I would say, because I was also a site director in the commercial fitness space, is that, certifications aren't everything. People will say, oh, well, I'm CSCS certified, so I know what I'm doing. That's not the case. And just because you're CSCS certified doesn't mean that you know everything. And really, it's actually the experience that you have. So there's a lot of coaches that come in and just say, hey, you know what? I got my degree. I got my certification. Okay, I'm ready to roll. Experience is so much more important than anything. Because if you think about it, like, what does a certification tell you? It tells you that you have the minimal amount of competency to do the job that you're certified to do. What experience tells you is that you can actually coach it and actually take athletes through it and progress them through it and make each and every one better than when they came in. Because that's the biggest thing. Because I mean, you could say, okay, well, this athlete's the best. Let's all try and be like this athlete. It's not like that. Like, it's got to be about making sure that each and every athlete that I work with is better from their own perspective than when they came in.
With regards to like your programming, your progressions, and your philosophy, and how you coach, what coaches would you say that you would probably kind of base off of your stuff off of? Like, I guess, like for me, like a lot of my strength stuff is like Yesis, or my speed stuff is like you said, Charlie Francis and Dan Path.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've learned from a good amount of strength coaches, and for me, at least, and this is why I tell actually my coaches that work for me and that kind of stuff, is that it's not necessarily like one strength coach that I follow. Like, it's been basically my whole experience of working with a bunch of different strength coaches, learning from strength coaches and taking what I liked, but disregarding what I didn't like, and then kind of bringing it into my own coaching philosophy. And so on, it kind of comes all together into what your view of strength conditioning is, and so on. And so, like, from a speed perspective, I'm all about telling a story. Like, we're going to be focusing on one, linear speed or multi-directional movement. If we're working on linear speed, okay, we're going to be working on increasing stride length, decreasing contact time, are we working on stride frequency, and so on, and then kind of figure out what those which one we're actually focusing on that day is, and tell a story to the athlete so it's actually relatable. And that's where you get really high buy-in. When it comes down to the strength training perspective, I mean, I keep it simple. I say, okay, one day is upper push, lower pull, other days upper pull, lower push, and so on. Because a lot of the time, like with our weight room, I've done it more as a free reign. So basically, we'll have multiple teams, multiple different athletes, and we have some athletes that come in 5 days a week, which is awesome. You never see that in any high school ever, ever. But at the same time, when you have that, you need to make sure that one, they're not always working on the same things each and every time, but then also not working on the same muscles on back-to-back days or working on plyometrics on back-to-back days and that kind of stuff. So within that, I also from even a periodization perspective, I don't even really focus too much on that because at least at the youth age, you don't have to really they don't need it. I focus more on Charlie Francis, just an ideology mostly, his vertical integration periodization methods of just trying to basically manipulate the central nervous system with high central nervous system and low central nervous system days. So that way, because if with classical periodization, the whole issue is volume. Right, there's a volume problem because you're working all the way up until you get to actually race pace. But when you get actual race pace, well, then it's race time and you've had basically zero volume at race pace. Whereas when you do stuff like high days and low days, then high day, then low day, then one, you're making sure that their central nervous system is managed, but additionally that they have a high amount of volume at actual what they're going to do at competition.
Yeah, it's interesting, going back to what you said, a lot of the schools that down in the South, not having a strength and conditioning coach. Because now when I'm thinking about it, when I was in high school, because I went to high school in Florida, we didn't have a strength and conditioning coach. Literally, our head coach was the strength and conditioning coach and would just give us a program to do. And you always had to do, one day was cleans, one day was deadlift, the other day was bench, the other day was squat. And then you had the day before a game where it's just hey, I need you to stretch and get a pump in before the work. Game.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, you still see it with the teams before games. They stand in a circle and then they do static stretching before games, and we all know that that's absolutely not what to do. But you still see it and so on. So, but yeah, it's a big problem down here at least, and even in other areas it still is a problem. And even if they do hire a strength coach, a lot of them it's just for football. That's it. They basically disservice all the other sports.
Yeah. Yeah, because in the South, football is king. You know what I mean? Football runs everything. But then also you say you're trying to change, the view of having a strength and conditioning coach at your schools. How are you going about doing that? And then how does that play into with the Xelerate Performance?
Yeah. So my whole thing is, I started this business about a year and a half ago. And I'll kind of backtrack and kind of get into the story and how I started everything and what kind of has been the scope of things. But so I basically, my parents moved down here to retire. I came down because I was that time I was in the PhD program at Kent State University in exercise phys. I was starting to become a doctor in exercise physiology and to do research. But then when I came down here to visit my parents and I saw the opportunity, I saw that there was basically nothing happening. I had just decided to drop all that. And I moved down here, just bought a bunch of resistance bands and med balls and said, okay, let's start it. That's basically how it all started. And then, so at first I had nothing. I had no athletes, no nothing. I was basically going from high school to high school, handing out brochures. I just had Instagram and a website and whatsoever. And I was working front desk at one of the private islands for $11 an hour. That's how I started everything. At the private island, I was able to build that personal training business from just working front desk to about $5,000 a month within 3 months. And then after that, I got another call from another private island, and then I was like, well, I can't do both. So then I started hiring people to work at the one private island to work for me, to train. And so they took over my business there, and I started off another island. And then at that point in time, that's when Bluffton High called. So that's when all my kind of knocking on the doors and handing out my brochures really kind of paid off. It's when Bluffton High called and so on. But then when they called, I was like, well, I can't do this island, so I'm going to hire more people to do more work for me. And so then they did the work at the private island and so on. And so that way I kind of already had contractors in place, and they also do speed training and strength training with athletes for me as well. And so basically the fast forward, the whole idea, not only with the Instagram, is to basically make aware of different exercises that you can do and try and increase the exercise inventory of every other people and kind of give my reasoning on why I'm doing things. But it's additionally to show that what we're doing at this high school down here is working and the athletes are buying into it and so on. And what we want is we want to be able to provide the strength conditioning program for more high schools around our area to be able to give them the opportunity to have what Bluffton High has and so on. And so that's basically my huge vision and what I want to do with it. Now, there's a lot of wiggle room to do with that because the high schools around here, they hate each other. So you really got to think about that twice at first, because here in South Carolina, you could go, if you live in South Carolina, you go to any high school you want. So basically recruiting is a big issue. Recruiting from to say, okay, well, I work with this person, come to our high school and you're going to have a better opportunity. And they can, as long as it gets signed off with AD and so on. So that's one loophole that I'm trying to get around. But that's been my big vision for a long time. Kind of like what I'm doing with these private islands is that we're providing personal training out of them. I want to do that with the high schools. Now, with the app, that's where I really see a lot of big changes that can happen, because the biggest issue what I'd see with athletes is that they would come to me and say, okay, well, I don't know what to do in the weight room. I'm working with you. And that's why I don't really put in that extra work. And I ran into issues where, okay, I'd write them out a program, but I would say stuff, I'd write down stuff like supine figure 8 hip activation, prone figure 4 hip activation. And they would look at that and be like, what the heck is that? And then they would go to YouTube, they look on Google, they might not be able to find it. They may find a completely different variation I wasn't talking about or whatsoever. And so with the app, what I was able to kind of make was be able to build a whole exercise inventory. So all my exercises that I have on the Instagram are downloaded on the app as an exercise inventory. But then coaches can actually go in and create programs with those videos and determine sets and reps, kind of like DraftKings. You kind of pull it up and you get to pick certain players. The same thing with the exercises and so on. And the athletes can go on and they could actually refer it. And actually what I've kind of done with the app is that strength coaches can actually go onto it. And once they become what we call a strength developer, then they could actually upload their own content. They could upload their own videos to be able to program within the app as well.
How do you become a strength developer? And does the app cost to use as a strength coach for your athletes? And
for the strength coach, yes, because we have to use the database and so on. But what it is, that app is completely free. And either way, we have different stuff. So for instance, the exercise inventory, that's free. The Be Your Own Strength Coach feature. So that's actually, so you could actually access that and be able to create your own programs as an athlete or as a coach and be able to refer to. That's free. But the stuff that we have as upsells are the follow our program design. So that's when every strength developer or approved strength developer, their programs are on that, and they could do that for 20 days. So basically they could do a whole month of programming. And what we have that's accessible for $9.99 a month. And then we have individualized program design where it basically runs like Instagram. So you have your own profile, you have your own posts or whatever, but they could go to a strength developer and choose them to be their strength coach. And they could train them individually through their profile. And then we have the strength developer, which is within the settings page. You can just click on apply to be a strength developer. Just fill out, there's just a couple of questions like what's your experience, whatsoever certifications. Once you do that, then it's $39 a month. And then you're able to use the whole, our database, but also upload your own videos and also program for people within their profile individually, or do generalized program design within our own program design. So that's the whole idea behind it.
So what's some of the success that you've seen, with coaches using, the Xelerate Performance app and how they've been using it to streamline their own business?
So the app is completely new. So for me, it's I haven't done a lot of testing with it. I mean, I know that it is completely functional and so on, and the whole idea behind it. So either way, it's a big learning process. But at the same time, I think it fixes a huge issue because I just remember at Carnegie Mellon University, we had our huddle page, and the huddle page was just full of different exercises, a complete mumbo jumbo. Good luck finding your exercises or whatever. But here it's made it very simple to be able to use, whether it's Olympic, upper push, lower pull, scroll through, click, and then determine sets, reps. You can write down whatever notes you want to be able to say, okay, make sure to do this, make sure to do that. And there's also speed programming on there as well, which I also think is very, very important.
And so with the speed programming, are athletes able to send video through the app? Or I know that you're just now starting it all and everything. I know there's a lot of development that goes into it. But obviously it's a great platform to have, for coaches.
I would like that to become the case at one point in time. Like for me, I developed it all myself, and What's funny is I developed it without writing one line of code either. So I didn't write one line of Xcode, one line of JavaScript or whatever. I just used a no-code platform called Bubble and so on, and was able to develop this whole thing, which is basically a social media platform and also a place where you can create programs for athletes. So
that's impressive, bro, because I wouldn't know where to start making an app or so with social media or anything, bro. You talk about putting all these videos in there and coding.
How long was that process?
It took me about 7 months. It took me 7 months to do that. And I mean, like, I went above and beyond. I could have easily just made an app where you can just upload videos and then create programs from it. But I just went above and beyond. It's like, oh, I want to be able to upload stories. I want to be able to have people comment on things. I want to be able to, where athletes can create community and they can actually have other people following them, kind of like any other social media realm, but just have it specific with athletes and so on. So that it just became an idea, and I just kind of ran with it.
Yeah, you said 7 months like it was easy. Like I'd still be sitting here working on it. Y'all wouldn't hear from me for years talking about 7 months, bro.
Well, hell, I've taken classes in coding and that kind of stuff, so I have a little bit of that. I'm a little bit self-taught in Java, so I understand it to a degree. So I had a little bit of baseline. It's not like I started with nothing. So
yeah, I remember computer science when I was in college, and I guarantee you I made it past the first 2 weeks, and then I was out of there, and then started math and with the computers and all that.
Oh yeah, I took Visual Basic and C++. Like, I mean, like completely like very easy realms of programming and that kind of stuff. But it's cool though. I mean, if you ever have an app idea and you ever want to run with it, then just hop on Bubble and just learn it. And you could make basically anything out of it. You could even make like an app like Uber out of it if you really want.
Yeah, I had to ask you to do that, bro. But we also talk about, you create an app, but you're also, programming and all this stuff. And then how are you tracking all your athletes and using the numbers to kind of, see where they're at, and kind of also using this platform to help other, high schools see what the benefit is of having a strength conditioning coach?
Yeah. So with us, it's nice and simple. So, I mean, just like how we did it in the college program, everyone has their sheet of paper and so on. They have day 1, day 2, and with it, and it's basically the programming is within it and so on. So I could write down what their weights, what they did was, and within the paper, there's 4 weeks of programming of each and every day. And so that way it keeps it nice and simple to be able to keep track of either 1, what weights they're doing, or 2, how they're progressing, and that kind of stuff. So we utilize that to kind of keep track of their weights and all that other kind of stuff. And then when it comes down to the app, it just kind of, for me, it helps me because like this is going to be this first summer because I can't work with the volleyball team. And so they asked me for the summer program, and they're going to be doing everything through the app and so on. So it's going to be kind of like a good test to see how it works with a coach doing it. And obviously I'm writing my own notes and cues what they're kind of looking through the app. But it's going to be a good test to see, okay, like how does this work and so on? Because either way, like it's still like kind of like a beta version. So we're still kind of learning through the process. But I think the idea is great that, that you could basically look at videos and create programs for it and then have multiple days and kind of always revert back and so on. And so that's what we're kind of trending towards for it.
So for a coach, trying to break into this industry, or, a newer coach, older coach, whatever it may be, what would be your best piece of advice in finding success?
Don't get discouraged, because trust me, I mean, I'll share this bit. So I was also a strength and conditioning coach for Robert Morris University, which is a Division I school in Pennsylvania. And the head strength coach, the head guy, this is my first day. Obviously, when you're not the head guy, you're cleaning weights a lot of the time. You're not always programming. You're doing all the stuff that nobody wants to do. He calls me over. He's just like, Bryan, I just want to share with you one thing. No one gives a shit what you do. No one cares. I just want to share that with you. And so for me, I was like, well, thanks. I just went through a master's program, did all this, and now you're telling me no one gives a shit about what I do. But it's true though. I mean, really, especially in college strength and conditioning, you have to suck up for at least 2 years to even get like a good assistant strength coaching job, and then even to get a head one, like you have to grind it. You have to grind it out. If you want to be going to college strength and conditioning, all the best to you. But it's a really, really hard road. But at the same time, you learn a lot. You learn a lot when it comes on the program and when it comes on the exercise inventory and so on. You got to soak all that up, and you got to take in from those coaches, learn from them, and basically take in like what you like. You can disregard what you don't have to like everything that they do, but just take in and make sure you remember it. So for later on, when either one, you're heading your own strength conditioning program, or two, you start your own business or whatever, those are all tools that are really going to help you later on and so on. And so you just really have to make sure that you stay in the moment, that you don't sit there and be like, oh man, like I'm an intern, I'm living off of ramen noodles. I mean, that's the price that it takes to be able to do what we do and to do what we love, because it's not that easy. People don't just walk up to you and be like, oh, are you a trainer or are you a strength coach? Can you train me? You don't get that. Okay, so it doesn't come for free. So through that whole process is that you're just going to learn. So, and make the best out of it. Because I've seen, I can't tell you how many people that I graduated with exercise science degrees, and they're selling real estate right now. Like, they're not in this field. they're not, because it was just too much, which I almost did. I mean, I almost went into selling cars. So you just got to find your own niche, put your work into it. Sometimes your first niche isn't always going to be the right one. I mean, either way, like with me, like my business is a hybrid. Like, I work with a lot of athletes, but at the same time with the private islands, I work with special population. I work with Parkinson's. I work with old people. But for me, that helps me sustain my business, because a lot of times, like only athletes isn't the case, especially when you first start. You're going to have to work with general pop. Is like athletes aren't going to be working with you in the mornings. They have school. And so you need to be able to always be able to provide and that kind of stuff. So like athletes is the fun part, but at the same time, you also have to keep in mind, what puts the food on the table.
It is interesting to see how the strength coaches kind of just used to be okay with making that, the minimal amount of money and then just the grind. And then you've seen that progression into a lot of strength coaches having their own business or making money on the side through programs. And sometimes I wonder what's next, because it does seem like a lot of strength coaches are now starting to see the value that they present.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely, I mean, I've been in that situation myself where you think like, man, is this like this field really the field that is going to be a breadwinner? You know what I mean? Like, am I going to make a living out of this? Am I going to be able to sustain it and pay my bills, right? Because like you said, athletes aren't always there. Like they're in season, right? Some get injured, right? You can't always train athletes all the time. That you got to be able to train general population. So I think it's always great to hear from a guy that's been in the industry for so long and know that like, hey, the struggle that we're going through now at our age is the same struggle you guys went through. It's just like you just got to find a way to make it through the storm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. Because when I first broke into the industry, I mean, I'm coming from a hockey background. I'm saying athletes. That's it. Okay. That's all I want to work with. That's it. But at the same time, when I started working with special populations, even with Parkinson's, like the look on somebody with Parkinson's face, if you're able to get them to skip again, is completely like revolutionized. Like, it's just like they're so happy. And then you have a high level athlete get their PR and clean. They're like, all right, on to the next one, and so on. So it's actually just as rewarding, if not more, like working with special populations in general pop and so on. And plus, they're a lot less busy, a lot more regression proof. And so it adds stability to your business if you have your own training business.
I was curious as to what do those progressions and regressions look like for somebody with a neurological disorder, teaching them how to, how to skip and stuff.
Yeah, doing movements such as dance, skipping, or whatever, it's very therapeutic for them. Because either way, with Parkinson's, it's deterioration of the precentral gyrus and so on, and they kind of lose a lot of their motor functions and so on. But just doing simple stuff, it takes a lot of time, especially doing simple karaoke steps. It takes a lot of time. But I mean, with some of my Parkinson's people, I have them doing karaoke 360s and that kind of stuff, which is absolutely nuts. But it's really, really cool to see them kind of progress that. But like when I progress them in the skipping motions, is more like straight leg skip patterns and that kind of stuff.
No, that's all really, man, it's impressive to hear what you've done and where you've come from and how long you've been in the game and how long you've been able to push through and kind of find a way, but also still not being humble enough to know that, hey, like just working at athletes isn't going to pay all my bills. Like I got to find another avenue too. to go down. So like, kudos to you, bro, for continuing going on. I mean, obviously I found you on Instagram and saw the work that you were doing, did our homework and saw all the stuff and was like, man, we got to get this guy on to talk about, just the avenue, the industry and where it's going, the gaps that we're missing. How are you helping to fix those gaps and alleviate for the coaches, and how you're helping athletes get better, and just all the different types of things I think are huge parts for a lot of our coaches that are listening in, and even for the athletes, who to get with and who to find. Because it's easy to get lost on Instagram nowadays. It's easy to be like, oh, well, this coach is doing something really cool, right? But they don't really understand that there's a progression to it all, right? There's a pieces to get to where there's what they're actually showing on there. And what you're doing is you're showing all the progression on Instagram. And I know we talked about it before we got on air. There's a lot of people jumping on and saying, hey, why are you doing this if this is supposed to be like this? And there's always those Instagram guys. I think they know more than what you know, but you've obviously studied it enough and have enough experience, so I just want to give you your flowers on that, man, before we jump into this last 90-second one round answers, you know what I mean? So that's what.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that. And I mean, the biggest key is actually the most simple exercises are probably the most beneficial for you. So I think people try and get a little bit too complex, a little bit too crazy, but really like something as simple as a lateral payloft push press, core, great exercise, and so on. And people try and do a lot more crazier stuff than that. But I mean, at the same time, it's core activation, transverse plane, a lot more going on to it than what you think.
For sure. So our last segment of the day, man, we got a 90-second round. One word answers is going to be 10 questions. Now these questions are going to be all across the board. They can be about strength and conditioning. They can be about just everyday life, right? So are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. 90 seconds on the clock. First question, favorite post-workout snack? Best coach you've ever had?
Alan De Janeiro.
Favorite sport to train?
Hockey.
Pizza or burger?
Burger.
Do you prefer off-season or in-season?
Off-season.
Top athlete you've ever trained?
Liam Gilmore.
Your favorite exercise?
Peterson step down.
Which you prefer, a good sprint session or a heavy lift session? Best coach in the industry currently?
I want to say Alan De Janeiro. I'm a little bit tight on that. I just think he's really, really good. So,
okay. What is your number one flaw as a coach?
That if you want it done right, you do it yourself.
Would you rather be in the octagon with a gorilla, tiger, or a bear?
Gorilla.
And that is the 90 seconds, man. We appreciate you, Bryan, for coming on. Appreciate you jumping in for that 90-second round, man. With so much knowledge dropped today and so powerful on what you're doing over there in Bluffton and trying to change, the whole game, not just for yourself, but for all coaches and for all athletes across the board. So thank you for coming on. And we can't wait for the listeners to listen to this on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thanks for having me and stuff like that. And I'm an open book, so just reach out to me at Train Efficiency, and I'll get back to you whenever I can. So
that is it, boys.